Hello, everybody. We're going to be talking about a couple of things today. The first one is this idea that or not idea, but kind of like conclusion I came to based on some ideas or some thoughts I had. There is another idea which I was just thinking about, which I don't remember right now, and we're going to try to see if I can remember that idea because it had to do with a dichotomy, with a variable, with this like black versus white type of ordeal. So, two ideas that are opposing or that oppose each other. Um, all right, so the first one is the private weird life versus the public normal life, and how famous people show their private weird life. So this idea came to me because, well, after I've always been an advocate for independent thinkers, for developing your own original thought, your own, like I always thought of it as like rolling out a toilet paper. Like you grab a toilet paper and you roll it out, and it just like that rolling out is like you being yourself, like being your true self, like being originally you, spontaneously you. And I have always thought incorrectly now, I think, that people didn't have that originality. I mean, they had the potential for originality, for being themselves, but they just wouldn't express it, no? And now I think I'm wrong because even though I've always been a person who has thought of himself as someone who expresses their originality, who I really am, right? Like my authentic self, even though I am plagued by social conventions, social expectations, cultural expectations, um, I do have that part of me that's like, I'm gonna be myself also in public life. Um, and now I see, for example, that it's not that people don't have that uniqueness, that special quality to them, that being yourself, that originality. It's just that they keep it hidden, right? And this goes hand in hand with an idea from Andrew Bustamante where he talks about you have your public life, your private life, and your secret life, right? Now, we're not going to get into the secret life, but the public, this relationship between the public and the private life, we're going to touch on that. So, the public life is basically like who you are to other people, right? And the private life is who you are when you're alone, sort of say, or like with really trusted people like friends, family, things like that. Hold on, I think I'm getting the idea. No, wait. It had to do, I think, with because I just said this of friends and family, and this is like a cliche, right? Of no, maybe language. No, no, no. It had to do something with propaganda. Not sure. Okay. Anyway, I'm gonna continue the original idea that I was going for. Um, Public life then is who you are in general, like in like who other people see you are, and see what I see now is that most people do have that originality, that uniqueness, that be yourself, except they keep it hidden, right? They keep it in their private life. And that's not to say that they haven't exposed it to friends, to family, even to public life, but it's more in terms of they don't expose it because it doesn't have value, because others don't really care, right? So, what makes you you, what makes you unique, what makes you different, most people keep it to themselves. Most people keep it privately, right? And who you are in public is basically like an archetype, like sort of say like a stereotype, like an expectation, right? If you're a doctor, you behave like a doctor in public, right? If you're a teacher, you behave like a teacher. If you're I don't know, like a housewife, a husband, like all of these, a friend, and if you're the cool friend, that's how you behave. If you're the stingy friend, that's how you behave. So these expectations, we all feel those expectations when we're in public, right? But when we're in private, right? When we're in our trusted comfort zone, that's when we can let out who we are, right? Who we truly are. So I would always like um kind of not demand, but I would always want people or expect people to be themselves, right? And they would just kind of look at me like, yeah, that's cool, but no, right? And I wouldn't understand why. And now I think I understand why. Well, kind of like using this criteria, which to me, it kind of comes down or it boils down to the fact that people will be themselves in their private life, but not so much in their public life. Why? Because it doesn't really matter. Now, this is where it's going to get like a little bit interesting because then we can say, then when can you be? Because look, you can behave publicly in private life even, right? And you can behave like you do privately in public life. Like for example, I imagine if uh, like if you're in an intimate relationship, right, with somebody, you'll still act like you're in public with that person, which is weird, right? Because you're supposed to let your guard down and show who you really are and show your emotions and your vulnerability and all this stuff. Oh, it keeps coming back to me. It had to do something with like using these cliche words, right? Or the limitations of language, something like that. Before the video's over, it will come back to me. I know it will. Like I just get these flashes of the idea. But anyway, so who you are in private can sometimes be who you are in public, right? Which is weird, right? That's super weird because then we're talking about a person who will operate in their relationship, in their with their family, even with themselves, like very seriously, like very almost professional, formal, like, right? Like how you're supposed to be with other people. Um, and that can come across as cold, right? As distant. Anyway, that's interesting. But what we're going to talk about is how people will go from their private life or will take things from their private life, from who they really are, from even their talents, their originality, their uniqueness, what's special about them, and will turn that public, right? Now, I've always been trying to do this and I've failed miserably at it, I think. And I think you notice because you don't have to be famous to know this. You have to only be um like you have to only be yourself with the people around you, with your locality, right? With the locals, sort of say. So like the people in your community, in your city, in your neighborhood, right? The people at work, at school, friends, family, whatever. And see, this is where people will try to, let's say, I want to be a singer. I'll sing right in front of my family. They'll like clap. Oh, yeah, you're really good. They'll say that because they're trying to be nice, but it doesn't really go beyond that, right? So when I try to make it out onto the scene, right, I moved to LA, to New York, and try to start a life as a singer, right, as a talented singer or whatever. People just aren't having it, right? Because what I think what makes me special or what I really like in my private life isn't really that special. You see, and that's where it gets tricky because you do have things that make you special. We all do, but for most people, see, for most people, how can I say this? Like, most people don't care about what uh, most people don't care about what makes most people special and unique. Most people only care about what a small portion of people, or what makes a small portion of people special and unique, right? So I'll give you like an example. Like most people have things that make them unique, right? And if you hear someone like playing the guitar, practicing a sport, whatever, for you it's no big deal. It's like whatever. I've seen that 1,000 times, right? But then suddenly you see someone who's really good, and then that person develops that skill or grows up to be like a very talented athlete, performer, actor, actress, right? Like rich and famous. And that's another thing. So you this will give you fame and fortune, right? It will give you money and fame. When what makes you unique and special, other people like, right? Or when other people like what makes you special and unique, right? It's kind of interesting. So now you can also tell me like, hey, but there are people that are famous that are not really that special, that don't really have a unique talent, that they're just, famous. And I can tell you, yeah, yeah, yeah. So that those are people that what makes them special and unique, right, isn't liked by everybody, right? But they had the means, they had the money, right? So it's not like they're doing that to get rich because they're already rich, or they at least have some form of money to pump into ads and publicity and to get known, right, into popularity. What they're doing is essentially that they're just achieving fame, right? So achieving wealth is not the same as achieving fame. You can be wealthy but not famous, and then you pump your wealth into a marketing campaign, and eventually you'll be famous, right? Which, on the flip side of that, there are people that may be, like not rich and not famous, and then what makes them special, people start to like, or people start to like what makes them special, and eventually they'll get famous and rich, right? Um, Now it would be interesting to analyze the third situation there, which would be, can you be famous and not rich? Sure. I think what happens there, or some examples of that, would be like people that will become like viral on the internet or trending topics. So they'll become famous for like 15 minutes, right? They're 15 minutes of fame, but they won't necessarily become wealthy from that, right? Okay, so that's interesting because it's like, how can you tell if other people like what um what makes you special and unique? Well, because other people will like it, right? And again, you don't have to be worldwide famous to in order to prove to yourself, or in order to validate, or in order to see whether or not you are good at what makes you unique and special. All you have to do is check with the locals, right? If what you're doing draws attention, if people are like, oh, hey, that guy's good, or that girl's good at that thing, right, then you know you're good at it, right? Unfortunately, and the sad reality of all this is that most people, us, me included, we're not good at what we do. We're not good at what we like to do, and we're not good at what makes us special and unique, right? Because see, that's funny, because we all have things that make us special and unique, and we're all different. Yes, when we collide, or when we're in society, right, in public life, we know how to act, we know what expectations are expected from us, we know how to conduct ourselves, and we do so, right? Just like a copy paste, just like an NPC, right? We replicate the behavior of others. We know how to be a teacher, be a student, be a whatever. But then in our private lives, we have these things that we that like naturally just came to us, right? Like, I'm a big fan, that's what people talk about when they ask, like, what hobbies do you do, right? What hobbies do you like? What do you like to do in your free time? What do you like to do in your spare time? Oh, I like to collect coins. I like to write nonfiction. I like to study biographies. I like to play baseball. I like to play guitar. I like to sing. I like to play chess. I like to, and those hobbies, you would think that with your hobbies, you could get famous. You could achieve your dreams of becoming world class chess player, world class singer, world class blah blah blah. But the thing there is that, if everybody achieved those dreams, then we wouldn't really have world class, because then everybody would be the best, right? So then nobody would be the best. Um, So there are limitations, right? You like something and you would want to be good at it, or let's say not good at it, because you could have the perception that you're good at something, right? But still, other people are the judges of that, right? Other people are the jury, essentially. They are the ones who will judge whether you're good or not at that which you like to do, right? Which for me now, I kind of get it. It's like, I've always pushed for this private life to go public, like be yourself, right? And it's like, no, because not we don't find everybody attractive or good at being themselves. It's like, no, like how about just be what's expected of you, and that's that, right? Because nobody wants to deal with all of this, how can we call it, yeah, all of this uniqueness from everybody, right? Why not, we could ask. Well, that would be an interesting question. Why can't we put up, maybe because of mediocrity or mediocrity, no, not meritocracy, uh maybe because people, maybe because we don't want to watch the same thing over and over again. We want to actually watch something outstanding, or someone do something outstanding, something extraordinary, right? Not ordinary. Because we can say, oh, yeah, like I've heard this person sing, and I've heard this other. I've heard my uncle who really likes to sing. And I've heard my friend who really likes to sing, and I've heard this other person who really likes to sing, and they all sound alike. There's nothing special there. But then you hear someone who's really famous, and who's really good at singing, you're like, whoa, yeah, that's good. Which again, just because they're famous doesn't mean they're good. You can be famous because you're rich and you have money, and you just pump that money into a marketing campaign to make yourself famous, which again, if I were, see, I think, if like, not everybody, but like, for example, me, if I had the means and the money, I would probably pump that into like my music or my videos or whatever, to make myself famous. And see, that's where people will get tricked. That's where the public will get tricked, because they'll think, oh, I see this person everywhere. This person must be good, right? Because why else would I see them everywhere? Well, it could be that they're good, but it also could be that they're paying to get noticed, right? Um, so yeah, there's that to watch out for. Which I would think before it was harder to achieve fame, right? So people that actually got famous were actually good, and now there's like a bunch of famous people who aren't good at anything, and I think they're just famous because they have the money from beforehand to achieve fame, right? And what they actually want is fame. So that's how famous people show their private weird life, right? Famous people uh, that what makes them unique and special, um, is also something that everybody else likes, right? So if you're like, my weird quirk, I think it's perk or quirk, or my or the weird thing I have is that I can sing, or that I can play this sport really well, or whatever, right? And other people like that, then again, they're the jury, they're the judge, and that means that it's like, you can do this so that you can get paid to do it eventually, and you can actually live off it, and like work as this, right? You're so good at this that, and I think that's what everybody wants to do. Everybody wants to be able to live off what they like to do, and what they think they're good at. But what you like is sometimes not what you're good at, right? That's where it gets tricky. So it's like, just because you like it and you've done it for so long doesn't mean you're necessarily good at it to the point that other people will pay you to do that, right? Most people won't. So that's where it's like, you're just average. You're just like anybody else, right? Which would be interesting to analyze the your worse, right? Because again, there's like better, the best, right? There's average, and then there's worse, right? So it's like this person who, and I don't know why I keep talking about singing, but this person who's like really bad at singing, or who's really bad at something, but they like to do it, right? And it's like, whoa, like that's completely private life, right? Like even secret life, like don't take that out of your house. I don't know. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to discuss is perception versus interpretation. So this is from Edward Bernays, which I've mentioned. I'm reading him. So the idea here, getting a little bit into like the marketing and the propaganda side of things, is that most people don't want to interpret, because interpretation implies or means you have to think, you have to analyze, right? So what you want to do, excuse me, is like read the news or learn about something that happened somewhere, and like get that information so obviously or so obvious that you don't need to think for yourself, right? Like it was funny, I was watching the latest episode of Rick and Morty, and the power went out, and this guy, you could hear this guy from inside his house go, "Oh, the TV went out. What am I supposed to think now?" Right? And I found that to be funny because I said, "Yeah, like basically the news tell you what to think about things, right? They give you the information, and then so you just take it as it is. You make your pseudo interpretation, and that's what you eventually end up thinking, right? Those are the conclusions that you reach. It's actually the job of the journalists, of the news anchors, of the writers, of all of these people to interpret the information, right? To frame it, to tell you what's to select, what's important and what's not, right? What to include and what to omit, how to present to you that information, right? So this is interesting because perception needs to be obvious, right? How you perceive things has to be clear, has to be, like as is, right? Because if something is confusing, or there's too much information or not enough information, or it's not very clear, it's ambiguous, it's left open to interpretation, people aren't going to want to interpret, right? They're not going to they don't want to think, basically. So that's where it gets interesting, because it's like we like to think of ourselves as these people who think and who are like rational, and homo sapiens and all this stuff. But again, most people, because I've mentioned this before too, most people don't think, and they don't like to think, right? They like being told what to do, so they can just do it as is, right? And in order to be told what to do so you can do it as is, you need instructions that are clear, right? You need that perception where, what I'm perceiving comes into frame, comes into my mind, and I just go ahead and carry out, like the, how can you call it? Like where you punch in numbers into a machine and you just carry it out, right? Interpretation then um, becomes a need in my point of view, because you would have to have it as a need to interpret, right? And not so much to get fed information. So that's kind of where the difference is. Um, the last thing then I wanted to discuss, I'll see if I can remember that other thing, are incentives, which is ultimately what motivates people to do something. And I don't remember if I've touched on this point before. I may have. Well, with behaviorism, it's inevitable. But I was just recently watching a Tony Robbins video where he talked about this, and he said, and I think it's something that's true. People will want to avoid loss, so there's like a negative aversion threat. They want to avoid loss instead of getting something positive like a reward or even a promise of something, right? So it's interesting how people will have this need of doing things only when it's actually necessary or obligatory to do it. So not until, and this I have spoken, or I have touched on this point before, which is the fact that a rat will run faster through the labyrinth. I think that's something Jordan Peterson said. I don't know if it's true, but it makes sense. It will run faster, right? Getting away from the threat, from like a bigger animal that's going to eat it, will run faster, as opposed to when there's a treat or cheese at the end of the labyrinth, right? At the end of the maze. So again, punishment or threat versus reward or promise, right? Which is stronger, which is faster. And this is because, like, in education, you have the idea of incentives, which is to control behavior. Ultimately, it's a behavioral perspective, and I've always kind of been against it, but I feel like just recently I applied it, right. Like, well, you can think of it like this: like, it's actually very primitive, very fundamental, right? Like, how do you get people to do things? Money, right? Give them something that affects their work positively, right? Like, for example, with students, it can be excuse absences, right? Excuse activities, right? Or justify activities, right? Like, and that's actually what I ended up doing. I ended up like telling them, like, if you guys do this one thing, like, but it was kind of interesting because we did a type of, I don't remember how you say this word, sorteo in English, but we did, let me look that up in English. A draw? No, it wasn't a draw. It was like a, yeah, like a raffle type of ordeal where basically what I did was put, like, I told them, like, if you guys, it was so they could arrive on time. So I told them, if you guys arrive on time, the first eight from the group, there were like 14 people. I told them, like, the first eight to arrive on time will be able to participate in this raffle of first place, second place, third place, right? When I draw out their names, right? Which I did like the next day. So what I told them was, you guys are, if you guys arrive, the first place, winner, if you guys arrive on time, the first place winner will get like two absences excused plus an activity validated, which they didn't do, right? And then the second place, vice versa, they'll get um, two activities validated, which they didn't do, in one absence, justified or excused. And then the third place will just get one and one, right? So that was to incentivize them, and it really worked because they even got there like before, they got there super early. A lot of them, not everybody. Actually, only like nine showed up. But I think if I wouldn't have done that, like, maybe three or four would have shown up, if that. And on time, I don't think anybody. So that's using or applying incentives, right? Incentives will get people to do things. Um, And I guess what's important here is what happens after, right? Because you can't keep giving people things all the time in order to make them do things, or can you? Because that's how capitalism works, right? That's how capitalism works, and that's how the economy works, right? People get paid to do a job, to work, right? And what keeps them coming back is what? The incentive, the money, right? People don't do things for free or for fun, right? Rarely do they do that unless you're like very humanitarian. Um, but the idea here is that you need to find ways to incentivize people in order to change their behavior or influence their behavior ultimately or fundamentally, right? If you want to get sophisticated, see, and I'm talking about me because it's like I don't really have experience influencing people or things like that, but I feel like one way where it could get started is here, right? Like incentivizing, right? And what do you incentivize with? You already know what people like. You like the same things, right? And this is like students, but if you want to talk about like adults or other, I mean, these guys are adults, but like more maybe like public, well, school or public, but let's see, maybe more informal areas like on the street or things like that. Usually it's with money because I think that's how you get people to participate too, like in surveys and things like that. You'll say like, oh, hey, I'll give you a sandwich, or I'll give you like a couple bucks, or I'll give you this much money if can I ask you a couple questions. And they're like, sure, right? So you give them something, you incentivize them, right? Like I had this friend of mine recently who actually interviewed someone on the street who was living on the street, and he ended up giving this guy like food and drink, right? Food and drinks, because that's the way that you have to pay for that, right? It's like something, right? Quid pro quo, kind of like the justice principle there. So you can't expect to get something for nothing, right? So you do have to give something, or at least you have to simulate or appear to be giving something, right? Like in this case, points, money. Money is like a very fundamental thing, right? Like just give people money, but there are other things, and that's when you start to get creative, right? Because money is the first thing, right? Like I'll just pay you to come, I'll just pay you to be on time, things like that. But for example, the raffle, this dynamic that we did, I think that was kind of interesting too, because it wasn't like everyone's gonna get it. It's like get there, and then there'll be like three winners, right? Like not everybody's gonna get this, because you can't just be giving this stuff away out like candy, right? Candy's another one actually too that gets used a lot. But anyway, I didn't remember that other idea. I don't want to finish off this video without. Let me just try to remember, because I think I remember. Well, I think I was thinking about like the private and the normal life. The private, and then when I was thinking about the private weird life versus the public normal life, I think I started thinking about like another like two opposing ideas there too, that had to do with limitations of language, how we perceive things. I just recently did the video where I spoke on freedom and how we're actually very limited in our freedom, or what we perceive as freedom. But I don't think it had something to do with that. I think it had something to do with something else, which I think was, well, if I remember, I'll make a short video explaining that other idea, because I think it had the fundamental structure of perception, interpretation, um, but I think it had to do with mediocrity, right? Or this idea of not being good at something, not really being good at something, and people not really uh, willing to pay to see that which is average or mediocre. Oh, I think I'm remembering, because they were adjectives. Oh, yes, I remember. It was whether something is resistant or contagious. Yes. So the one of the I remember now because it was adjectives. One of them was contagious. Oh yeah. So you've seen this idea where, oh yeah, I remember, contagious versus repressed, right? So the idea here is that there are people that will say, well, that person got mad because he was repressing, or he was withholding, or he was bottling up all of his emotions, all of her emotions, right? So then came the day when they just exploded, right? When they just like let it all out, right? They were repressing, right? These emotions, right? And then they just ended up, it was like the straw that broke the camel's back, right? The last drop in Spanish, right? La gota que derramó el vaso, because this person was repressing these emotions, right? But then I think about emotions then, and I'm like, well, what about this idea? And I don't know if you've seen it, where like the boss is yelling at the worker, at the husband, right? And then the husband is yelling at the wife, and then the wife is yelling at the kid, and then the kid is yelling at his toy or her toy, right? And then it's like, well, or is it contagious? Is the emotion not really? And I think to a certain extent it's an opposite idea, because repressed means that it's in you, right? That you're like not expressing these emotions, right? And contagious means that it's coming from outside, right? That it's coming from your boss, from your friend, from, it's like this idea of like, and I've seen these videos too, where it's like someone does a bad action to somebody random on the street, and then a couple minutes later that person does something bad, and it's like a chain event or a chain effect of like all of these bad things that started out with one person doing something bad to somebody else, right? But then the opposite is like when you do a good kind action, then that gets replicated, right? And everybody is treated nicely thanks to this one person doing something nice. So that would be the idea of contagious, right? like this is contagious, or is it that and it's like kind of nature versus nurture, right? Because nurture would be this idea um of like replication and contagious, or contagion. I don't know if that's how you say it. And the nature, the genetics would be, well, this is just how I am. This is how my genetics, how my body, how my biochemistry is telling me to act, right? And if I repress it, then it's like I'm withholding all that stuff, and then eventually it's just gonna come out. So I want to take this further, but I don't know how. I'm like trying to, but I know that was the idea basically. And what seemed interesting to me was to think about, I guess, emotions that way. Like, what is it then? Is it that they're contagious, or is it that they're really just inside of us and we're repressing them, and that's why they come out that strong? Where well, I came to the conclusion, I think, while I was thinking about this, that it's actually not. I think I said it's always, well, fundamentally, it has to be contagious, because you would have to have been exposed to these emotions. You would have to see, exposure means that you are seeing it in other people, right? So you're learning by modeling. Other people model for you, and you take that in. But then you can choose, not choose, but I guess you can not act a certain way, right? Even though you see it, you can not act that way, and you do choose to a certain extent. You choose among this wide amalgamum, or I don't know how you say it, like you choose among these options basically, how, and again, maybe not consciously, but you do choose how you're going to react, or let's just say choose how you're going to react. And then those needs, which are ultimately genetic, can have a certain level of repression or expression, right? So you can repress and withhold that, or you can express it. um but yeah, I was like, so which is it, right? Which I think it's ultimately genetic, right? It's nature, even though I've always been an advocate of nurture, because being an advocate of nurture, or the context, the outside, means that you're able to change, right? Which I do think you're able to change. So it's like you're able to change, but you're highly motivated by your nature, by your genetics, right? By who you are. Um, by your, even to circle back to the beginning, to your private life, right? To why you are this way, and why you like the things you like, right? And why you would like to be successful at the things you like. See, and this is just to finish that idea too. This is not for everybody. Obviously, there are people that are like, I just like to sing karaoke's, and that's good for me, right? Like, I don't want to make money off it, or like become famous. Like, I actually like going to the pub, going to the bar and karaoke, on karaoke night, just like drinking and singing with my friends, right? Like, I don't want to make money off it, right? Um, so there are people that like doing what they like doing, how they're doing it, right? And they wouldn't want to do it a different way, right? But there are a lot of people that do, right? Kind of like I was. So this idea of like rap, for example, it's like maybe rap is not something that I was meant to, because the public's the judge ultimately. It's like the public from the get go would have been like, oh man, this is hot, like, get famous quickly. Well, not get famous quickly, but we want more of this. I think that's where it comes from. The public is like, this is good. I want to see more, right? And when people are just like, oh, very nice, very good, yeah, bye. It's like, then they're just being nice, right? So it's like, why do they do that? It's not fake. It's like, I see what makes you you. I see what makes you unique, original, whatever. But I don't care if I don't see it again, right? So it's like, that's kind of the thing there. So anyway, glad I remember that, contagious versus repression. Yeah, that was the idea. So which is it? And I guess we'll leave it off here. So I'll see you guys next time. All right, bye.